Hi everyone, this is Richard from your resource team over at ADS New Directions, welcoming you to another virtual class. Today we're going to talk about communication. We thought this might be an appropriate topic, seeing as things in general are opening up more in society, and in terms of us at the day programs here, that we're starting to welcome more and more people back to the programs, which is a wonderful thing. So a lot of us may have been kind of home with a very small social network over the last little while, and we're going to start coming back to either day program or just getting out into society in general and interacting more with people. So we thought we would do a little class on communication and communication skills, some of the things that we probably know but might be a little rusty on because we haven't had a chance to practice them for the past year and a half or so. So our class today is communication. Okay, so first question I have for you, what is communication? At its most basic level, communication is the giving and receiving of information. So like these two fellas here, I know this person has a question and this person has an answer. Why do we communicate? All right, so often we'll communicate in order to obtain information, right? So if I'm hungry and I'm getting home and I'm asking, someone, where is the food? They can tell you where that food is and you can satisfy your hunger, get some food. To learn, so to learn new things, we can learn that through communication. In order to stay safe, right? So if you're going to tell your friends about maybe, there's some sharp objects on the sidewalk or something like that, right? We can help each other stay safe. We can learn about the dangers and avoid them. Enjoyment. At the end of the day, humans, we are social beings, right? And we like to communicate with each other. We like to talk to each other. So it's an enjoyable thing to talk with others or to communicate with others, however we do. These people having a wonderful conversation over here in the image. All right, so give examples of ways people communicate. All right, so there are many ways that we can communicate with each other. Here's a list with some examples. Talking face to face, talking over the phone, writing emails, texting. I know nowadays is one that's probably taking over a lot. I know myself, I don't consider myself like a super modern tech person, but I definitely text a lot more than I actually make phone calls anymore. Probably for every phone call I do, I probably send about 20 texts. And I think for people that are even younger, it's probably the ratio is probably even worse, right? So people texting is definitely a very common form of communication nowadays. Telling a story, acting, giving a speech, using body language. So those where you're making faces, gestures, the posture of your body. Singing a song. So often, songs often tell a story, right? So think some of your favorite singers, lots of songs that'll tell you about breakups and things like that. So yeah, songs can definitely convey a story. Writing a letter, note, or poem, the old school ways, writing an actual physical letter to someone. A couple things that aren't on this list here that are a little more common nowadays would be, communicating through social media, also communicating through things like Zoom or Facebook Messenger. These are, more modern ways, and especially during the pandemic, these have become much more commonly used. So these are other ways that people communicate. Yeah, so this list is definitely not an exhaustive list. There's definitely many more ways that people communicate, but here, these were a few of them. All right, so how can you give messages? All right, so the things that people hear, what do people hear? They hear the words that you're saying. They hear the volume that you're speaking at, right? And this conveys different things, whether you're shouting something or whether you're whispering something, right? It's conveying different things. Your tone of voice, right? So the way that you're saying something. I think back to being a kid and the way that, my mom would call me, you could tell right away her tone of voice, whether it was like, Richard or Richard, you know, you can tell if you're in trouble or if things are okay, right? So tone of voice definitely conveys a lot of things, even when saying the same words. All right, so the things that a person sees. So you see body language, right? So it conveys a different message if if you're standing and your arms are crossed, or whether you're leaning back, or whether your fists are raised, right? So all of these things convey different things. So no matter what the words are, the body language is definitely conveying something. Your facial expression, again, whether there's a big smile on your face, whether you're frowning, whether you're scowling, these are important factors in communication. And we have this handy pie chart here that kind of re-emphasizes what I was just talking about, right? All right, so it's talking about the importance of things in communication. You can see 7% of communication is the words. So what you're actually saying, the words that you're actually saying, only accounts for 7% of the message that you're putting out there. All right, the rest of it, the vast majority of it, is other things. Okay, so 55% of it is your body language. All right, so most of communication is your body language, and that includes your facial expression too, right? So the way you're moving, the way your posture is, what you're doing with your face and arms and things like that. The second most important aspect of communication is your voice. Okay, and that includes like the tone of voice, the modulation, the pauses, right? Yeah, so that's the other important part of it. All right, so basically most of communication isn't the actual words you're saying, but it is the way, like it's your body language and your voice. Okay. How can you receive messages? So you want to show that you are that you are listening by being an active listener. All right, so what is an active listener? An active listener makes eye contact. So you want to look at the person who is talking. All right, so nothing is worse than talking to someone and have them looking at their shoes or looking out the window, or even the absolute worst is when they're looking at their phone when you're trying to talk to them, right? It's very disrespectful to the person, and it definitely doesn't send a good message and doesn't help with communication. You want to occasionally nod or say things like, oh, or uh-huh. Yeah, so basically you got to give little cues that you're actually listening to them and not just zoning out, right? So little things like the odd nod, the odd little comment, lets them know that you're listening and you're engaged in what they're saying. You want to provide non-judgmental feedback, but don't interrupt, right? So if someone's got a long story about an experience they're trying to tell you, you want to give them things like, oh yeah, oh really, oh wow, those kind of comments, and you don't want to interrupt them. Let them finish their story. You don't want to jump in and talk about, some experience you had that was similar. Let them get their story out first, right? Check your own facial expressions and body language, right? So we're talking about like giving messages, right? How important your body language is when you're doing that. It's just as important when you're listening, when you're receiving messages. This is something I found too over the last year or so. I've been doing a lot of the Facebook Messenger chats and the Zoom chats and those kind of things. And one of the things that's good about them is you get a little picture of yourself too, right? In the little corner of the screen, it'll show you and what the camera's showing, what you look like when you're talking or listening, right? So I often kind of check myself that way. I'm like, oh, you should smile. Check myself. Oh, look a little more interested, smile, look a little more friendly, right? Sometimes, we kind of forget these things, and that camera actually gives you a little visual of what you're looking like to the other person. So use that if you're doing any of the online stuff. But in general, kind of keep that in mind too, right? You want to look interested, you want to look friendly, you want to look like approachable, right? That's really what it is. All right, so there's a picture here. This woman here, she's talking, and everyone else is looking like pretty active listeners, right? So there's certain things that they're doing. This woman here, she's got a smile, right? They're all making eye contact. This man here looks like he's leaning in a little bit, so he's kind of interested in what she's saying. As well, this man here, like he's focused, right? So these are all cues that they are actively listening and probably giving this woman some feedback that her communication is being effective and they are engaged. Or if you really want to show you're an active listener, you can cup your hand against your ear and show that you're really trying to hear every word possible. All right. All right. Why is good communication important? You can avoid misunderstandings or conflict, right? So often a lot of the conflicts or the arguments or the bitterness that we have against other people, it's not a result of them trying to be mean or anything like that. It's often just a misunderstanding. Like the communication was bad, and when communication goes bad, it can lead to conflict. So if we can communicate effectively, we can avoid that, avoid a lot of conflict, avoid a lot of arguments and misunderstandings in our lives. Communication can help us stay safe. I think I talked about this earlier, like there's something dangerous on the sidewalk or something. But yeah, in many ways we can, we can learn the dangers out there. We can communicate dangers to the people around us and keep everyone safe. Makes people feel good and respected. Nothing is worse than being talked down to, right? Or like not being communicated to. So people like to, they like to feel like part of the group and they like to be treated well. So if you're providing good respectful communication to people, giving them the information that they need, everyone's just going to feel better about themselves. Can create a positive working environment. So often a lot of the problems people have at work is because of miscommunication, right? Whether that's between like the management, the bosses, and the workers, if the bosses aren't communicating well to the workers or why they're making changes, things like that, that can often lead to anger and a lot of mistrust of management, right? As well within coworkers, if they're not communicating with each other, and then that makes little resentments and things, it's a difficult thing, right? For a lot of you guys coming to program, program is a working environment, so you want to think of if you have good communication with your peers and your staff, things are going to go smoother, right? If communication is poor, then it doesn't make for a very good environment. People are angry, people are upset, and then people don't want to come to work anymore, right? You can also think about, your work experience opportunities. If you're on a move job and you're trying to move a couch and people aren't communicating and you're banging and knocking things over, right? It's not good for anybody. So good communication can definitely help create a positive work environment. Little quick comic here. So this lady here, she's talking to this man. She says, "We're checking everyone's communication skills. Here's the first question. Are you a good listener?" Long pause. What? All right, so this guy is obviously not a very good listener. He was kind of zoning out and not listening well. So I think he failed, this fella. Another comic for you. The most important part of communication is listening. Today, we'll learn all about active listening. Who can tell the class what active listening is? And this lady puts up her arm, says, "Active listening is when you try really hard not to fall asleep while others are talking." All right, well, I'd imagine that is probably the first step. If you're asleep, you're not an active listener, but there is much more to it than that. All right, communication. So poor communication can cause problems in all types of relationships. I'm sure we've all been in situations such as these. I'm going to ask you to think of some examples now. Have you ever tried to communicate and been misunderstood? What happened? What could you have done differently? What happens when communication breaks down between you and your friends, you and your partner, you and your family? So communication can be a very hard thing, right? And especially in the relationships that we have, right? You'll often find that when communication breaks down, things get worse, and things often don't get better until those lines of communication reform and you start communicating effectively again. So communication is very important for healthy relationships. All right, I'm going to invite you all to try an active listening activity right now. So I'll ask you all to go out and get yourself a pencil and paper. If you need to pause this video while doing so, that's fine. So once you have your pencil and paper, I'm going to read out some instructions to you and you're going to follow them to the best of your abilities. All right, so when everyone's ready, well, I'm going to start now. All right, so step number 1. Draw a large circle on your paper. Step number 2. Draw a smaller circle on your paper. Step number 3. Draw an even smaller circle on your paper. Step number 4. Draw a rectangle on top of the smallest circle. Step number 5. Now draw a square on top of the rectangle. Step number 6. Inside the smallest circle, draw 3 dots making a triangle. Step number 7. Underneath the 3 dots, draw a sideways triangle. Step number 8. Underneath the triangle, draw a half circle facing up, like the bottom of a smiling face. And step number 9. Now, lastly, in the middle circle, draw 3 dots in a line. Okay, so those are all the instructions. So you should have a drawing on your paper, and let's see what it looks like. Hopefully it looks like this. So it should look like a snowman. Did your picture turn out like a snowman? If it didn't, there's some. Why do you think that was the case, right? So this was definitely an example of very one-way communication. Like you had no chance to interact with me. You had no chance to ask any questions or for clarification of what I was saying. Yeah, that was my communication of doing it. The ways that it could have been improved, right? If there was two-way communication, if you could have asked for questions and clarification, probably some of my instructions could have been a little bit more specific than they were. So I imagine a lot of the drawings look a lot differently than this. Hopefully you came up with a nice snowman, but if you didn't, it's definitely not your fault. It's an example of poor communication of this activity. All right, and I'm going to end off with just a quick review here. This is something just something to think about and where you would place yourself on these different skills. So we're going to review some communication skills, and then you're going to kind of think for yourself how this applies to you, right? So for each category, then we're going to talk about a behavior. And is this something that you never do? Is it something that you sometimes do? Or is it something that you always do? So the first one is do you make eye contact with others? So this is both when you are talking and when you are listening. So do you never do this? Do you sometimes do this? Or do you always do this? All right. Do you start conversations with others? Are you aware of nonverbal messages, right? So this is your body language, your face, facial expression, things like that. Do you say whatever is on my mind? All right, so this is one. Do you have a filter, right? Are you kind of aware of things you should say and shouldn't say? Or do you just say whatever pops in your mind regardless of the situation? Active listening. Do you do active listening? So all the stuff that we talked about today. Do you acknowledge others? Are you polite, respectful? Do you use manners? And finally, do you listen and wait until the other person is done talking? All right, that is all I have for you guys today in our short class about communication. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining today. I hope it was informative for you guys, just a little refresher on our communication styles and our communication skills. Once again, thanks for joining, and I hope you will join us for another virtual class in the future. Have a great day, everybody, and I hope I can communicate with most of you face-to-face very, very soon. Take care.